But what I'm so curious about as well is like from a physiological standpoint, once she was able to drop fully into her body because you guided her, did you then notice a drop in that
Mm.
voice, more of a command from
Oh
her
yeah,
diaphragm?
yeah, yeah, for sure. And what will happen with the chakra system, um, and the psyche as well. I mean, again, they're all overlapping maps, but is you can think of it sort of like clockwork. So there's 7 primary chakras. There are many other, secondary minor chakras, but they're all inseparable. They all work together in a system. We always want to look systemically. And one chakra will often, if there's a wounding or a deficiency, we could say in one chakra, another chakra will tend to overcompensate. So I don't know that this is the case for her, but let's just say maybe she's really activated in the second chakra. Even though there was some sexual abuse, maybe she really identifies as being this sort of Venusian beauty and having this sexual, sensual prowess and attraction. So that was really online for her, but the voice was really small and girly. So it's like there's almost like a balancing act that happens where one can overcompensate for the other. Another example I have of a client who he was a man and he was having some sexual dysfunction,
Mm.
and his intellect was really overdeveloped because his sexual chakra, there was this deficiency there for whatever reason. I didn't work with him long enough to get totally to the root of that, but I could see how his intellect, he was so identified in being wicked smart and super sharp and could out debate anyone. And so that was overdeveloped, and there was excessiveness in that third eye center chakra, the intellect, but the
Mhm.
sexual sacral chakra was deficient. So a lot of times you'll see that
Like an
overcompensation and
imbalance.
coping mechanisms. Someone who, maybe had a lot of trauma in childhood becomes really funny, and they're overly developed in this, trickster or comedic way, for that persona. Our persona develops often around our personality traits, actually often develop around our wounds.
Mm. Oh, wow. We can keep going on and on and on and on. And okay. And I know that you have created just so many incredible things that I want to ask you about. But you co-founded a priestess mystery school.
Yeah.
And what does that even mean? And what are you still doing that kind of
Mm.
work, or how does that show up in the work that you do
Yeah.
now in
I love
combination
that.
with everything else?
Yeah, I think of my work as really a triple braid. And that vision, that image I actually got from my co-founder of we used to have a urban priestess mystery school, which was a year long, a 13 moon actually, mystery school. We ran it for 3 years. We closed down that particular incarnation of it a couple of years ago, and we're no longer in that partnership, but Sienna is incredible, and our work was incredible, and we both came with different priestess traditions. And she would talk about this weave of the triple braid, and I see that in my work, where the 3 real rivers that converge in my work are the yoga tradition, depth psychology, mainly Jungian depth psychology, influenced by Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung, and then my priestess training. So the 3 of those are always at play. So with the priestess training, I would say my priestess was Ariel Spilsbury, who's incredible. And using a lot of ritual, using the elemental forces, symbolism, of course, the lunar cycle, the solar and lunar cycles, the 8 high holy days or the 8 Sabbats, the wheel of the year, really reclaiming the power of the divine feminine
Mm.
and the Shakti, really the wisdom and power of nature herself.
Mm.
And how do we access all of that in the myriad ways? So whenever I teach, whether it's a teacher training, especially doing live events, I'm always crafting rituals and weaving in, perfect example would be, let's say, sexual trauma, because it is so common. And when I started teaching my yoga psychology teacher training, 300-hour teacher training,
Mhm.
And I had the women, it was, my students are 99% women in the room, and we started telling our stories. I was really actually surprised and shocked at how many women had experienced sexual trauma.
Yeah.
Astounding, you know, 2/3, I would say, at least.
Isn't it like
And
1 in 4 women or something like that? I think it's like the stats are
I
crazy,
think
but
it's definitely more than 1 in 4. I think it's more than 50% of people.
wow.
Yeah, I would say anecdotally, I don't know like a scientific statistic, but from my personal experience,
Sure.
definitely
'Cause
more
you've trained
than,
a lot. You've trained a lot of women.
yeah, I definitely more than half of women
Oh,
and men, by the way, because
wow.
men in my teacher training, you know, I've only had a few men in my teacher training, and more than one
Do
were
you
sexually abused.
do you find that
The women, by the way, I do want to mention.
perhaps when, you women and men come to this sort of training also for their own healing benefits as well?
You know, it's interesting. I find, and I teach in my training a whole lesson about the wounded healer, which is the archetype that I think many of us
Mhm.
hold, which, and
Myself
also
included.
the aphorism of teach what you need to learn, you
Yep.
know, that we're often drawn to the topics that we ourselves most need to learn. And many people, I think, just like starting yoga, they may not realize that many people you know, their traumas are so repressed, they're actually in the unconscious. Some people have awareness, many people have some awareness, but they may not have the awareness of how much that trauma is actually driving the bus, you know, running the show.
Mm.
And some people have done a lot of work, of course, and are in that conversation.
What what questions would you give, or maybe like a practice, something like where people can kind of get started to ask themselves that question about maybe unraveling their own traumas?
Mhm. Well, first of all, I would say that if you have any inkling, if you know, you've experienced, let's say, big T trauma in the sense of acute trauma, again, sexual abuse, physical, verbal, emotional abuse, addiction in your family, if you know you had maybe an attachment disorder with your parents or caregivers, you definitely want to be seeking professional help. You absolutely want support as you're walking through this journey. I will also say, I don't believe that it's like a one and done thing, like we ever kind of get to the other side. I really think it's important to reframe it as the journey is the destination. And we all have core wounds, what I would call soul lessons that we're here to learn. All of us are going to have a handful of big soul lessons that we're here to learn. And I don't know that we ever necessarily get to the other side and we're quote unquote healed. I really think it's more of inviting in, as Rumi talks about, inviting in and befriending and working with these, and actually seeing how there's a big phenomenon in trauma resolution of reframing from post-traumatic stress syndrome, PTSD, to PTG, post-traumatic growth. How have these things actually developed you into who you are, helped you develop superpowers and attributes that you wouldn't have otherwise? And so it's a positive reframe.
See you next time at the Brave Table.